All right. So we are here to talk about charts. So charts today. I will be demonstrating in Excel, though all of the Microsoft Office products use the same charting engine. So what I mean by that is that everything that you see me do in Excel, you can do in PowerPoint, you can do in Word, you can do in any other tool that you want. So it all uses the same tool. I'm a bit old school, so I do tend to still use Excel for all my charting, but that's just because I've been doing this for a long time. And in the old days, the other PowerPoint and Word used a thing called MS Graph, which was pretty rubbish. So that's why I still use Excel. So we're going to talk a little bit about data visualization, because that's what charting is all about. It's about finding the message in your data and making it telling a visual story. So we'll talk about data visualization, we'll talk about how to create a chart, we'll look at all the different elements that make up a chart, we'll look at how to manipulate and format those particular elements, and we'll look at a couple of the more advanced tools such as adding in a secondary axis. And finally, I'll show you a couple of other things that you can do in Excel to help to visualize your data as well, so some other tools other than just charts. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's get started. I'm just going to turn off my video so that I can, you don't see me squinting at the screen as I look at what I'm trying to hit. Okay, let me just click that button there. Okay. So charting, it is all about visualizing your data. So what you want to do is have a think about what it is you're trying to say. What story are you trying to tell with your data? And to pick the appropriate way to visualize that. And to think about, should this be a pie chart? Should this be a line graph? Should this be a bar chart? What sort of chart is appropriate to the story that I'm telling? And let me show you, I've got a website up here, which is Perceptual Edge. So Perceptual Edge is a great resource for data visualization. And those kind of things about what's the best way to display this particular sort of story that I'm telling. One of the things they have here is this graphic design IQ test. If you just put graphic design IQ test into the search engine of your choice, it should take you here. And essentially, it just shows you there are sort of 10 different ways. It shows you 10 charts side by side and tables, and asks you which one do you think is easier. And you will learn a great deal from just doing those 10 questions. So I would very much advise you to do that to help you with your data visualization. Okay. Now we also need to consider those who are colorblind, or if you are printing in black and white, so you need to think about that when you're creating charts as well. So for example, the one that we've got on the screen here, you see how it's dependent on the colors for you to be able to interpret the chart. So if you can't tell the colors, the difference between the colors, like the red and the green there, then you're really going to struggle to be able to interpret this chart. There is a great website called VizCheck, and VizCheck has some tools that allow you to look at what something would look like to somebody who has the most common form of color blindness. So it also has a little add-in if you've got access to Photoshop. So it has an add-in for Photoshop that you can download for free, or you can just upload pictures and put them in, and it will show you what they look like to someone who suffers from the most common form of color blindness. So that's something to also bear in mind with when you are charting. Okay. All right, but let's get stuck into Excel and let's have a look at creating our first chart. I would say this data that I'm using is very much sort of sales based. It's quite small data sets, but everything I'm showing you will apply regardless of what your data actually is and how big your data sets are. So everything I'm going to show you will work for you too. Okay, so I've got this data here. The simplest way for me to create a chart, I can do it with a single finger, and that is by pressing my F11 key. So pressing F11 will create your default chart type from your data. Otherwise, I can go to Insert, and from there I can insert charts. So here's my charts. I can do a recommended chart, or I can just pick one from here. But for now, I'm just going to hit my F11, so you'll see what happens when I do that. Okay. So I hit F11 and it's gone and it's created my default chart type. and it has created it on its own sheet. So you'll see here that I've now got chart 1, so that's a new sheet that I've got. So I've got that chart 1 there. Okay. And if I come here and look, we've got these chart tools. You see, when I'm not on there, when I'm not clicked on my chart, I don't have those chart tools. But when I click inside the chart, you'll see that I get my chart tools. So I've got my design and my format. And these are the things we're going to be looking at in more detail. But just coming from the design, you'll see we've got the add chart elements. We'll talk about this in more detail later. But we see this is how I can add in extra things such as data labels and data table and so on. I've got some quick layouts, so this is just some like easy ways to show different things in my charts. I can change my colors, so I can use monochrome and things like that. These colors are being picked up from the color theme that I'm using within this spreadsheet. And then I've got some different chart styles here, so you can see you can get quite dramatic. Oh, look at that one, it's all kind of glowy and stuff. So you can see that there's different ways that I can, these sort of pre-built ones that I could use. All right. I can also do things such as switch the row and the column. So what does that mean? Well, at the moment, you'll see that I've got January, February, March, I've got total sales and so on. And then each of these bars actually represents one of my salespeople. So you've got their names down the bottom. If I just hit switch row and column data, it goes the other way around. So I've now got all of my individual salespeople, and then I've got the total sales and that sort of thing showing there. I can switch it back as well. Okay. So there are different things that I can do. I can also then from here select the data. So if I click on that, there are two different ways that I can change this. So if I click on that, I've got this select my data source dialog box, but it's gone to my data. And you see you've got the little crawling ants. So the little crawling ants is showing me where it's picking up all of the data from. So I can change this on either way. Let's say that I only want to look at January, February, March. I don't want to look at the total sales or the expenses and the net sales and so on. I can just untick these, and then I can say, okay. Right. I've still got the total there though, so let me show you the other way that I can do it. I can go into my select data, and from here I can grab my sales reps. Yep, so I'm just clicking and dragging there. I've got my sales reps, I've got the names, but I'm just going to exclude the totals this time. So I do that and I just say okay, and that updates my chart. Right. Okay, so other things that I can do from here is I can change my chart type. So if I click on change chart type, I open up my chart dialog box. This is the dialog box that would have opened if I'd said just insert a chart. Okay, so if I'd use the insert chart rather than the F11 button, this is the dialog box that would open. So you'll see here I've got some, I can go in here with recommended charts, so it's showing me some ones that it thinks I might like to look at that might be useful to me, so some different chart types here. Or I can come into my own and I could say, well, how about if I do a pie? Or that makes a lot of sense. How about if I do a bar chart? How about I do an area one? So I can just come in here and I can change it like that. Okay. So quite straightforward. And the final button that I have on this design tab is my move chart. So I can have, when I pressed F11, it automatically put my chart onto its own sheet. But if I click on move chart, I can see here I can put it on a new sheet, or I can make it an object in an existing sheet. So if I did that, you'll see I've got all of my sheets, my imaginatively named sheet 1, sheet 2, and sheet 3. So if I wanted to have my chart on the same page as my data, I can say OK. And now it's an object which I can move around by clicking and dragging. I can also resize by clicking and dragging on the corners and so on. Okay. Just so we've got more space to look at it, I'm going to move my chart and I'm going to move it to its own sheet. Okay. I am going to change my chart type back to a column. Okay, so I've got things like clustered column. I could also do stacked column if I wanted to, so that can be quite useful, but I can do 3D. I can tell you something, people, don't do 3Ds. Just don't do 3D charts, please. It doesn't make your data more exciting. All it does is make things very difficult to read. So I'm just going to say okay to that. All right, so that's really what I wanted to show you around those. That's basics of creating. Let's go into looking at some different elements. Okay, so let's go and have a look at all of the different elements that make up my chart. So from here, when I've got my add chart elements, you'll see that I've got things listed here like the axes. Okay, so you've got your primary horizontal and primary vertical axes. So that's the down the bottom and the bit along the side here. I've got things like my axes titles. So these haven't necessarily got a title in them, but I can add those if I want to. And then I can add them, add the names to them. I've got the chart title, so at the moment I've got it above the chart, but I can say no, I don't want one, thank you, or I want it as the central overlay, and so on. So there's all sorts of things. The data labels. So at the moment you can't see the exact figures on this chart, but if I wanted to, I could add them. Quite often I would put these sorts of things on the outside because then they're quite easy to see, or a data call out. So data call out can be good if you're using pie charts, but there, if I put them on the outside edge, it just means that they're easy there to see. Now, because these numbers are quite exact, probably what I would want to do would have a data table instead. So a data table here shows you, that's just another way to add that information in, and I can do it with or without the legend key. Okay. I've got here some error bars. So if I wanted to add in some standard errors or percentage and so on, so those deviations, if you're working with that kind of data, you can add that in. You've got here your grid lines. So this is how many grid lines do we have? Can you see that it's changing there? It's adding the primary and minor and so on. And then we've also got the legend, which at the moment is at the bottom, but I can say I don't want a legend. Or I can say I want it on the right. I want it at the top, on the left, and so on. Putting it on the right is quite common. Okay. And then I could add in lines. I can't add those in because of the sort of data I have, but I could add in a trend line, and we'll have a look at that in detail later. And I've got then up and down bars too. So there's all sorts of things that I can add in. And I can then really manipulate those as well. So for example here, let's say that I wanted to change this axis here. I wanted to focus more in on the differences between these people. It's automatically starting at 0, but I can actually change that. So I can come in here and I can go, let's have a look at the axes. And I can go and look at more axes options. And that opens up my format axis. It's not a dialog box. I'm sorry, for the life of me, I can't remember what they call these things. Task pane, that's what it's called. It's a task pane. If I just close that, let me show you other ways that you can get to that. So from my chart tools format, I can come in here and you'll see I've also got a list of all of the elements that currently make up my current chart. Okay, so I've got the chart area, I've got the title, I've got things like the legend, I've got the plot area, and I've got the vertical axis and the major grid lines. So if I pick the vertical axis, see now it's selected that, I can then say format selection, and again that opens my task pane. Guess what? There's another way we can get there, and it's right clicking, everybody's favorite. So you just need to make sure that, I'll just click away from that. You need to make sure that you right click on the right thing. If I right click over here, nothing happens. If I right click on my chart area, it's going to be the chart area. If I right click over here, I get different sorts of things like changing my chart type, saving as a template. We'll talk about that later. But if I right click on the axis, I can come in here and I can say format axis. So there you go, lots of different ways to do it. So you see here that we've got this set as auto. So my axis options, I've got things like changing my minimum and maximum, changing my units, so my major and minor units, and that's just about where these lines appear and what appears here. And I've got that it's the horizontal axis crosses, it's automatic, but I can change that to that axis value and so on. So there's lots of different things here. If I want to display the units, I can have tick marks, I can have labels, I can have how we're doing the numbers. So how do I want my numbers formatted? So at the moment, you can see I've got those decimal places and so on, so I can change that if I want to. But let's just see. If I change my minimum to, let's say, 1500, and then I just click somewhere else. You see how that's changed my the way that my chart looks. So that's one of the sorts of things that you can do with your axis. Okay. All right. Now with this data, let's think about what am I actually trying to do. Let's say that if I'm comparing, if I want to, what's the story I'm trying to tell? Am I trying to compare how these people are performing against each other, or am I doing something else? So I might come in here and I might say, well, actually, I want to change this to a stacked column instead, and say, okay, so I could do a stacked column. Or I might say, well, actually, this is looking at January, February, and March. I want to look at them. I'm going to switch it around so I can see how each of them performed in the different months. I can now, if I want to, say, well, hang on, I'd like to reset my my formats again. So reset my vertical axis. You notice there is now I've got this task pane open. It changes depending on what I've got clicked. Okay. So from here, I've got my axis options. So my values, sorry, let me just click on here, my axis options. So sorry, from here I can do things like add fills, I can add shadows, I can change the alignments of text boxes and so on. And it's this little picture that looks like a chart which gets me into the axis, and I click on reset. So there's lots of ways that you can manipulate these. Okay. Oh, and one thing to note as well, let me just change me back to a clustered column just so we can see. One thing to note is I can select each individual series and do things like format it, but I can also select individual bars in that series. Okay, so if I click once on a series, it selects the series. If I click again, it selects just that single element. Now you may see, can you see there's some tiny little white things around there? Some little circles. So if I click away again, when I click, you see now I've got the circles on all of the red ones, see on all of those? And again, if I click again, I now lose those circles on the other things. So I'm just looking at it on that one bar. And we'll look at that when we go into looking at formatting. Okay. So you may be wondering, how do I go about selecting data and displaying data that's not together on my data sheet? So I'm going to come here to my sheet 2. So let's say that I want to look at creating a pie chart, but I don't want to use all of my data. I need to make sure that I collect the information that's about what the product is, but I only want to use something, let's say the Southwest. Yeah, so let's say that I just want to create a chart about Southwest, but I do want to include this information about what the products actually are. So in that case, what I do is I select the products, I hold down my control key, so I'm keeping hold of my control key, and I'm going to click over my Southwest too. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to come over to my insert, and this time I'm going to go with a pie chart. Okay, so I'm just going to go with a 2D pie. There we go. So that's now got that there. I'm going to move that chart onto its own sheet, just so it's big so we can see. Oh, new chart, oops, onto new sheet. That's what I meant to do. There we go, so it's bigger so we can actually see it. So this is really where things such as adding your data labels will come in handy. So I can say I want to do it on the inside edge or data callouts. So that's where that data callout can really help. Because I've done that, I don't then need to have my legend. So I can say, no, I want no legend. With these as well, what I can do is with my, I'll go to my home tab and I'll make those bigger so that they're easier to see. What else can I do with this? Oh, I could do things such as go, well, soccer's causing us problems. So again, if I just click again, okay, so I'm just going to show you how to do something. All right, so if I click on the soccer element, it's actually selected all of them at the moment. So if I click, can you see the little tiny, just those little tiny blobs there, those tiny circles that's showing me that. So if I click again, I now just have soccer selected, and I can do things like, this is called exploding the point. Okay, so I can explode the point, which just draws attention to it. Okay. Yeah, so that works pretty well. But I would like you to consider, pie charts are really common. Raise your hand if you use pie charts. Excellent. People don't use pie charts. I'm really glad that you don't. So nobody's prepared to admit. I think it's maybe because I just said they're really bad. I should have asked first. But let me just show you something which I find is just so convincing to me about why pie charts are not the best way to display your data. So have a look at that. Let's imagine that we didn't have those call outs on there. So let's just actually get rid of those, get rid of my data labels. Oops, I've only got one. You see, I only had one thing selected. So it only took the data label of what I have selected. So I'm just going to say no. Oh, now I've got my help. Yeah. Data labels, none. There we go. I'll put that point back in there again, unexplode it. So if you're looking at that, it's actually quite difficult. Our brains can't really cope very well with that. They can't really see, how much bigger is the grey slice than the blue slice. But if I change that instead to a bar, okay, and we'll still make it colourful, why not? Actually, no, let's not make it colourful, just do like that. Can you see how easy that is to interpret, how much easier it is to interpret that than it was the pie chart? Because our brains like this kind of thing. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to pause now and see if we've got any questions. Yeah. Okay, so we've got one question coming up here. Okay, so I'm just being asked, can you select the whole data table and then get it to split the data into separate charts? I select all but get a chart for each area or perhaps a chart for each sport rather than do individual charts manually. No, is my quick answer to that one. Though I might see if Dr. Google has a different answer. Maybe Fiona will have a quick look into that for me. As far as I'm aware, no, you would need to do those individually. Okay. I suppose what you could do is you could create your chart, then make copies of it. So you could, if you wanted to save time, that might save you some time, is if you created the chart with all of it in there and then make copies of that. So a really easy way. So if we go back to my chart 2 from here. So if I wanted to split this into Smith, Brown, Wallace, and Adams, for example, I could grab this chart. If I right-click on the chart on the tab, I could move or copy, and I could say create a copy and say OK, and then I could do it again, move or copy, create a copy, and say OK. So these are now all separate charts. And then if I come in here and say from the design, select my data, I could just untick the one that I didn't want. And then I could come to chart 2 and do the same thing. So you might find that slightly quicker. And you could probably write a macro to do that. All right, hopefully that answers your question for you. So let me just come in here and say answer live. Okay. All right, so moving on, let's have a look at formatting. Let me go back to my chart 3. Let's have a look at this. So let's have a look at how we go about formatting things. So we've had a quick look at these chart styles. So as you can see, some of them are fairly dramatic over here. We've got all these sorts of things going on. I've chosen with this one just to have that one color. I can, of course, change that and make it more colorful and so on. Oh, excellent. Excel has stopped working. Okay. All right. Let's just open up that one again. Okay. Let's, zoom in. Select all, just double click that one. Excellent. What on earth was I doing? Oh, I was doing, that's right, I had these ones selected and I had this one selected and I had created a chart. Okay. So yeah, there are different ways that I can go about changing those colors, but I can also change individual elements or series and so on. So with this, I can select the whole series and I can change the color of that. So I can come in here to my chart tools format, and I've got here things like my shape fills. So I can say, actually, I want to make all of those red, and that's going to make them all red. Or one of the things that I can do that when, if I'm trying to draw attention to something, I could make them all grey and then say, well, look, let's say that my story is the fact that baseball sales have increased lots, and I want trying to draw people's attention to the baseball element in here. So if when I click on the baseball bar, remember it selects the whole series, but if I click again, I just have baseball. So then I can change the shape fill of that to red, and it just really pops then. It really draws people eye. So that's part of graphic design as well, what we call CRAP design, contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. So this is the use of contrast to draw people's eye is drawn to what is different. So it can work really well in charts if you're when you're telling your story with charts. Okay. So here I can do things like with my, I can format, my my chart title there as well, and I can come in and I can make that bigger if I want to. And you see when I make it bigger, it automatically makes everything else smaller. And I'm going to come along and format. I could say, now let's make it all glowy. I could do whatever I like. So there's different things I could do with my axes here. I can change the shape of those. I've got my background here. So if I wanted to change my background so that it's sort of a light grey, something like that. So there's all sorts of things. Every single element you can format. You can format it to your heart's content. Okay. I think that's probably enough on all of that. So you can feel free to play with that. All right, so let's look at some of the more sort of advanced features, as you might call them. So here I've got a chart, and this chart data is all, let me go to, if I click, if I put my teeth back in, if I click on select data, it shows me where that data is coming from. So that's one of the advantages as well of using that select data. So I can see that all of this is coming from my tab that is called regions. This is my regions tab. Okay, but let's say that what I'm trying to do is we're looking at these differences. Okay, so we're looking at the differences in all these different regions and how they're doing for their sales. And the Northeast is doing very well. Southeast, apparently golf is going off there. But I might want to also compare this data to something such as the square footage. So that was the regions. That data is coming from regions. I've also got this data on my retail tab. Let me just zoom in a bit, which includes things like the square footage. Okay, so here I've got the square footage, and that might be quite interesting to see the difference in the size. I mean, the Northwest shop is a lot smaller than the Northeast shop. So that might be an interesting element to add to my chart. But that information isn't on here. So how do I do that? Well, you know what? It's not that hard. All I need to do is I select this data here. So I'm just clicking and dragging. I'm going to hit Control C to copy. So I'm just going to copy. I can see that it's copying because I've got my little marching ants. I come back to chart 1. I click in the chart and I do Control V to paste. Okay. So it's that simple. Now what have I done? Now my chart looks rubbish because I can't actually read these figures anymore because I'm not comparing like for like. Okay, so I'm comparing different sorts of data. I'm comparing sales with square footage. So they're different things. So what I really ideally would like is to have a secondary axis. Okay, so this is where I can have two different axes on my chart, so I can display different sorts of data. So I'm going to select, remember just by clicking on it, I have just selected that series of the square footage, and I'm going to go into my series options. So how do I get to my series options? Well, I could right click, I could come into my format, I could do all sorts of things, but I'm just going to go format selection. Okay, so I have here this series options. Remember that you need to be on the chart one. So if you've been playing about with doing fills and that sort of thing, then you might find that it's here. And if I click on here, that's going to give me these series options. So I'm going to say I want to do a secondary axis. Okay, excellent. So now I've got a secondary axis. So I've got my sales over here and I've got my square footage over here. Okay, but the problem is that's kind of blocking everything out. So I don't really want that to look like that. I want to change that chart type. Okay, so I want to change the chart type. So I'm going to come along to my design tab and I'm going to say change chart type. Now, you'll notice now I've got a combo chart. So it's telling me this is a combo chart because I have got bars and I want to do something else. So it's this clustered column, but this is my square foot average. I've got a drop down here and it's saying, well, what would you like, Lucy? And I'm saying, well, Excel, I would like a line, please. So you see how it's only got that one ticked for the secondary axis. So if I wanted two things to appear on that secondary on a secondary axis, I could tick it like that. Okay, that doesn't actually make any sense at all. So I'm going to leave that as a clustered column. I'm going to say OK. So there we go. I can now see, relatively speaking, how much the one thing relates to another. Yeah, so I'm able to compare to add in that extra information in a visual way that's saying what the square footage is of each of these shops. So I can make better informed decisions. All right. Okay, let me just go to my retail sheet and I'm just going to press escape to get rid of my marching ants. And we're just going to have a look at this retail space by quarter here. So what I can do here is I can add in a trend line. Okay, so again, if I'm going to go to my design, I'm going to go to a chart element. Remember, this is a chart element, would it be a trend line? So I can come in here and I can select trend line. At the moment, I've got none, but I can do linear, exponential, linear forecast, moving average. I've got more options in there as well, but if I just do a linear, and I'm just going to pick central for this one, and I say okay. So then I get a trend line going through as well. Right. Now let's say that I would like to reuse some of these charts. I like the way that I've got it set up. Let me go back to my chart one. For example, let's say that I think this is looking pretty good. I'm pretty impressed. I can come and right click and say save as template. Okay, so if you've got a particular chart that you like, you can then go and say I want to save this as a template. And it's going to save it as a .crtx. Don't worry about that. It's a chart template. Once I've saved it as a chart template, then when I go into my change chart type, you'll see that I've then got templates. So all of your templates will be stored in here. Okay. Now that's using 2013. Just so you know, if you are using 2010, it actually appears on the ribbon. There's a button on the ribbon that says cool. All right. So just see if there are any questions arising from any of that kind of stuff. Okay. Just give a moment in case anyone's frantically typing. If you are frantically typing, why don't you raise your hand as well so that we know? Excellent. Okay. So that was really what I wanted to show you on charts. So I hope that's given you what you needed for charts. Oh, there was one more thing, which was doing the pattern fill. So earlier when we were talking, I've just managed to do a pattern fill, but that's not what I intended. We were talking about that printing. So if you're printing or if you're doing this for the visually impaired or somebody who has color blindness, using these pattern fills is a great way to go as well. So if we just come in and we select, for example, that one, and we say, I want a pattern fill, then we can add in little dots and that sort of thing. I can also change the colors there as well if I want to. So I can still keep those patterns different, but I can do that kind of thing. Yeah, I can still keep the colors different if I want to, but that's going to help when you're doing printing in black and white, as well as helping those who are colorblind. Which, by the way, the reason I'm going on about that, it's actually fairly common. I think it's 1 in 12 men suffer from some form of color blindness. So it is very common. It's very rare amongst women, but it's only about 0.5%, I think, of women, but it is quite common amongst men. All right, so let's talk about some other ways that you can display data. So obviously charts are, a very major way that we display data, but there are other ways that we can have some visualization of our data as well. So let me just go and let's look at these European sales. Okay, so let's say I wanted to know how the France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and UK compare to each other. I don't want to create a full chart. What I can do is I can just grab all of these here like this. I'm going to go to the insert. I'm going to insert Sparklines. So there's these three types of Sparklines. You've got the line one, a column one, and a win-loss one. So let me just go, I think with this one we'll go with a column one. So it's coming up and saying, well, I've already selected my data range. It's going, well, where do you want to put that? Where do you want those lines to appear? I'm just going to put them at the end. Okay, so you see there now we've got that comparison going on. Yeah, so we can see that Italy is normally much better. Okay, but let's say I now want to do a quick compare about how a trend line about how these how each of those countries is doing as well. So this time I'm going to grab these ones and I'm going to, whoops, I'm going to go to my insert tab, and this time I'm going to do lines, and I want these to be located at the bottom. Say OK. So now I get lines. So you can see that Italy has got suspiciously similar numbers for every quarter. And France is going up, and Germany's going up and then plateauing, and the UK is doing different things, Spain's going down. So they're just really quick, easy ways for you to add in that kind of visual information to your data without having to go for a full chart. So I think they're pretty cool. They were introduced in 2007, I think, or was it 2010? I think it might have been 2010 when they were adding in. And you can see now I've also got my Sparkline tools, my design tools here. So this again allows you to change like the style of them. You can come in and you can edit the data. You can change them to, you can do things like show negative points and all these sorts of things. There's lots of things. I'll let you play with those in your own free time. But yeah, I do like the Sparklines. What we can also do though, so that was from the insert menu, insert, and it's these Sparklines. There's the line, the column, the win loss. What you can also do is conditional formatting. So conditional formatting is a really great way, and I think we'll probably do a webinar just on conditional formatting because there's quite a lot to say about it. But let's just again grab this data here. And with the conditional formatting, lots of it's built in. You can create your own rules. And I think that's why we need to talk about that in a separate session. There's a lot there. But we can do some highlight cells. We can do top, bottom. We can do data bars. So we can do something like that. Can you just see how that's changing? As I show, we can do a solid fill. We can do a gradient fill. We can do color scales. So we can do that sort of traffic lighting thing with the data too. Okay, and we can also do icons. So what direction is things going in? They're going up or down? You know, they're trending. We can use traffic lights. By the way, I would say to you as well, the traffic lights that have actually got different shapes are better ones to use. Again, because of if you're printing or if you're displaying in black and white. Okay, we've also got ratings and so on. So there's all different ways, and these are all built in, and they are all based on rules. So if I was, for example, to use this, and then that's made that. Let's just go and, sorry, the reason that they've gone, I'm sure you're aware, the reason they've all gone to those little hash marks is that the column is not wide enough. So I just go between the columns and double click, and that just makes them automatically wide enough to display my data. Excellent. So those are based on rules. So if I go in here and say manage rules, you see I've got this icon. It's using a particular icon set. I can say edit this rule, and this is the rules. This is how it's deciding which of those to give it. As I said, this looks quite complicated. Just to let you know, it's there. Feel free to explore it yourself, but we may do a session just on conditional formatting. Okay. All right, so that's just another couple of ways that you can that you can display your data in a visual way. So there's those trend lines, and there is the Sparklines, sorry, and there is the conditional formatting. Okay, so that really brings us to the end of everything that I wanted to show you. So we've had a look at how to create a chart from scratch. We have had a look at all of the elements that make up a chart. We've had a quick look at how you go about formatting those elements. So things like, formatting the axis so that the axis starts in a different place, or you can change the period between the axes. We have had a look at how you could change an individual element. We looked at how you can change the chart types, so all sorts of things using non-contiguous data, so data that's not sitting next to each other, even data that's on a different sheet. All right. So that brings us to the end. So if you have any questions, then feel free to ask them. I would also say to you all that we are currently deciding what our next set of webinars are going to be on. So if you have any ideas, if there's anything in particular that you would like to see in this webinar series, please let us know. You can either pop that into the Q&A now, or you can drop us an email, it.training@adelaide.edu.au, it.training@adelaide.edu.au. The webinar should be up on our YouTube channel before the day is out. Before you go, I would just like to just ask you whether you found this useful or not. So I'm just going to pop that poll up on the screen as well for just 30 seconds or so you can let us know what you thought. Okay, I'll just give you another 10 seconds on that poll. All right. So if you do have any questions, please just pop them into the Q&A, or any suggestions for future webinars, then please, as I say, pop them in the Q&A or drop us an email. All right, so we've had a suggestion that we should do one on mail merge. Absolutely, we can do one on mail merge. Mail merge is really useful. I use it for lots of things that do not include mail. And thanks for the suggestion.